40 is the new 30.
Generations change.
Everything in the world has been delayed. Women are doing things later, and it's just like our biological clock just didn't get the memo.
There are big consequences and big implications for women, so definitely if egg freezing is something that they've been considering, they should be listening closely. Fran, welcome to the One in a Million podcast.
Thank you.
I have a question to ask, which is what age were you when you found out that you were conceived as an IVF baby, a real life test tube baby?
Oh, that's a good question. Do you know what? I think I actually found out really young. I think my mum made sure she drummed it into me from a young age to know that I was really wanted and like the effort that she'd made. So I reckon it was probably around about the age of like 9 or 10, like from when I remember having that conversation.
So you have to know how babies are made in real life before you know how they're made in a test tube. I want to know how that conversation went.
Oh, do you know what? I wish I could remember the details of that. I just remember my mum saying to me that she'd tried for years and she'd paid a lot of money to get me.
That must have made you feel really freaking special.
Yeah, I think it was either that or she was throwing it back at my face. I'm not sure which.
But do you think it makes you see life through a different lens, knowing that technically you've had science and modern day technology literally give you life?
Yeah, I think it makes you feel empowered to know that that's possible. It makes you feel reassured to know that actually the way that science works these days, there's so much that can be done in situations which otherwise could be pretty awful for a woman.
Yeah, I think about it, the amount of times that, think about the lives that I've had up until this point. If I hadn't had medical intervention, how many times would I have died? Like, how many times have I been reborn through having antibiotics, having treatment when I broken my leg really badly? Like, all of these times, what would I have looked like? Or would I even still be here? I actually don't think I would be.
Yeah.
So medical technology nowadays is freaking amazing. And what we're going to be talking about is your journey, obviously, egg freezing, and what that process looked like, how you decided to do that, why you decided to do that. And I suppose for anyone who's listening and doesn't actually understand what that process involves or why someone would want to do it, what would be the way that you'd explain it to them?
I suppose the most logical way would be to firstly go back to why I chose to do it and why other women might choose to do it. And I think for me, the bottom line is that I'm not ready. I was not ready to become a mother. And everything in this world is so different now to what it used to be. And I think the way that things have now changed and the way that women are doing things later, and like we've spoken about before, like 40 is the new 30, it's true. And when you have the choice to be able to do something, and it's obviously an incredible thing to be able to do. I think there's so many reasons for me that I decided to do this. And I think some of it stems back to my mother's own journey. It's being an only child. It's knowing the struggle that she had to conceive me. That is part of why. And also the fact that I love my business, it's thriving, and I'm not ready to step into motherhood yet. But I know that one day I absolutely want to have children, but it's just not yet.
Absolutely love that. It's looking at what serves you best right now without discrediting the future. And you've got a really strong past to support your decision because you are literal evidence of the fact that these processes can work. But the availability and what that journey looks like is quite unknown. And you have been very open about sharing your journey and sharing your experience, what you went through, to comfort of many women who have followed you, to comfort of me as well, because there's so much that I've learned through your journey. The first thing that I can understand is getting to that point where it's on your radar. Egg freezing becomes something that you begin thinking about or you begin looking into. What was that moment that prompted you to start looking into it?
Do you know what? That's a really good question. It's thinking back to when did I first look at this, or when was it first on my radar? And I don't know that it's necessarily egg freezing that I thought about first of all, but it was actually more the sequence of life events. It's thinking back to a few years ago and how I thought when I used to think when I was heading into my 30s, I was thinking that you would be married, that you'd have children, that you'd have a house, and all of those things that I once thought I wanted back then were actually in reality, that's not what I want right now. And it's given me the opportunity to change the timeline, or at least made me feel as though I have that choice to delay it.
Now, that is taking control and power into your own hands. And this is something that women are doing more and more and more as generations change. The way of the world is changing now. And we deserve to be able to enjoy aspects of life that now with freedom we might not have been able to enjoy previously. But also, I think the traditional role of a woman is evolving as time goes on. It's not changing, it's still there, but it's evolving, and perhaps we're stepping into that more traditional role of motherhood a little bit later. So you followed your heart as to what you felt was right for you in the moment, instead of conforming to what society pushes onto you. Did that feel natural, or did it feel uncomfortable?
I think when I started looking into what the options were, it actually felt like a really natural progression to be able to go and to do this. Because when you initially think about when you probably want to have children, that timeline can change. The more that I looked into this, the more that I was like, yes, this looks like a really good option, potentially a solution to how I'm feeling at the minute. And I think it's allowed me to just delay that a little bit more. So it has felt quite natural. But the whole investigation process, I think for me, when I was researching, there was a lot of stuff that I wish that I could have seen. And I wish that I had somebody to speak to that had gone through the process, which is why then when I documented it, I was like, I want to share everything. I want to share the vulnerabilities, the highs, the lows, and answer those awkward questions that maybe women don't want to ask, or they just don't know, because if you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, and you have opened so many women's eyes, including mine, into the unforeseen pitfalls that could happen. And there are big consequences and big implications for women. So definitely, if egg freezing is something that they've been considering, they should be listening closely. Just to be clear, you're saying that you, from simply a time sensitivity perspective, I suppose, chose to go down this route, and it wasn't due to fertility struggles.
Yes, absolutely. So it was purely because of time. So I was 33 years old when I froze my eggs, and it was very much looking at the timeline of I think everything in the world has been delayed. Women are doing things later, and it's just like our biological clock just didn't get the memo.
I love that.
It didn't get the memo. Everything else we're doing later. We have thriving businesses, careers. It's not a case that you get married as young anymore. It's not a case that everyone buys a house. And actually, that whole thing in society, that's changed. And my thought process around all of buying a house and everything has also changed. But I think, for me, it's knowing that you do have that choice now.
Okay, so if you were in a position perhaps where you knew you wanted to have children and it's something that maybe you weren't ready for imminently, but you were concerned regarding your fertility, what would be the first step that you would take in pursuit of having some knowledge and control over your health and your journey to conceiving? Because I'm assuming the first port of call isn't to freeze your eggs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if I was struggling with fertility and conceiving, the first route would be lifestyle. It would be going through nutrition, stress, training, well-being, and just optimizing that. It would be, for example, being a healthy weight range, getting into that BMI. It would then be, what can I do from a lifestyle and a nutrition perspective to enhance my chances before going down the IVF route? And this is something I have a lot of conversations with women about. And it's knowing that IVF is there if people need it. And then maybe egg freezing is there. And for some women with PCOS, with endometriosis, with certain conditions, they might be more inclined to do that than others, potentially. But it's knowing that from a lifestyle perspective, I would go to that first, and then I would go down the medical route of doing this procedure second.
I hear you on that. So from your perspective, you knew that you wanted to have children. You didn't necessarily have a gauge of your fertility because you weren't trying to have kids. But if you were naturally to conceive, you would ensure that your stress is low, you're exercising, you're eating a healthy, nutritious diet, probably not drinking alcohol, no inflammatory products going into your body. On top of that, this is something that you open my eyes to, is that you are able to gauge or have a test to understand what your egg reserve is. Therefore, it gives you an insight into your fertility. If you could explain that a little bit.
So the initial process after the consultation, we got blood work. So blood work would be the first port of call. And this is something that's actually really accessible for a lot of women. And I think it's a great thing. You can even order certain tests online that do the pinpricks. You can go to a clinic and you can say, I just want to have my blood work and maybe my ovaries scanned. And it's a lot more affordable. It's a lot more accessible. And for reference, it could be between maybe £200 and £500. And that would enable women to see their ovarian reserve. So they can then see if they have low, medium, high egg counts, things like that. And then maybe that's just the first step into opening the door and having it on your radar, because you might see if you had a low ovarian reserve, then maybe that might be something that people could consider or would consider. Whereas if you have a higher, maybe you wouldn't yet.
That's really helpful information. And it's fantastic because also some women who perhaps would be worrying about their biological clock, if we want to refer to it in that way, if they actually had a lot of confidence in they've got a strong egg reserve after doing this test, then perhaps they wouldn't feel that pressure as much. But also with a strong egg reserve could be the best time to go down the route of freezing your eggs, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So upon your decision of finding and researching, how long did you research, by the way, to figure out if you wanted to do this?
I think I was researching for maybe a good 6 to 8 months beforehand, before I'd actually done anything, before I'd started to book the appointments. I was already looking into this, and I was trying to search people online, and I was following people, messaging people just to ask them their views and their experiences, because there just wasn't really that much in depth around how people felt about the process.
That's very true. And it's partly why we're recording this, and you've documented your journey to make it really clear as to what that experience looks like from your perspective. And the more women that share over time, it will be so nice for us to have like a encyclopedia of information as to what to expect. So upon that decision where you thought, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to freeze my eggs and I'm going to set myself up for, you know, my future decision to have a family, whether it's through that means or not, but to at least have that as a viable route. What were the actual first steps upon you deciding this is what I want to do?
So the first step was definitely having that conversation with Alex, my partner, first of all. And we'd sat down and I'd said, look, I want to freeze my eggs. This is something that I really would like to do. And we obviously had a discussion about that. And he'd never really heard of it. He'd never really known about it. And obviously being a man and being a younger man and myself being the older woman in the relationship, I think it's not necessarily something any guy ever thinks they're going to have a conversation about. And we had that conversation. We went through it. I expressed like what I wanted to do with the situation. And then the first step was literally just booking the consultation and obviously find the clinic. So I had a few different conversations with a few different clinics to decide where I wanted to be. And I actually ended up deciding on the clinic that I was conceived. So I went back to the same one that my mum had me.
Wow, that is incredible. That is like the most full circle thing I've ever heard. Yeah. Okay, so when you were looking to decide which clinic was best, what's the criteria for the best clinic?
So there's actually a website online that you can go onto and you can look at the data. And obviously being quite data driven and liking to see the statistics and the percentages and stuff, you can see birth success rates. You can see all of this information online and it's reported with these clinics. So you can do that. Obviously Trustpilot. I went through everything. And that was like a big part of it. So it's like where had really good success rates. And actually Bourne Hall was the clinic that the first ever IVF child was created. So it's historic. I think that's more of like in a spiritual way, that kind of drew me more to that as well. And I know that's a little bit more fluffy, but that impacted it. And then aside from that, it's thinking, okay, well, this is a big time commitment. So logistically, it has to be somewhere that is easy to get in and out of, because at certain points throughout the fertility journey, you might be going to the clinic every other day. You might have to go in for blood work, for last minute scans. You have to be able to get there. And then I thought, okay, well, this is somewhere that's 45 minutes from me, and it's going to be less disruptive to my business, to my working day. And it's going to mean that I'm not having to take half a day out every time that I go to a clinic.
That is such a valuable piece of information, because to anyone like me who's not aware of what that process involves, you wouldn't be aware that you'd actually have to spend so much time going into that clinic and to be present. Because if it's a huge commute, my goodness, that's going to take a lot out of you. Then that takes us on to actually, you are incredibly busy. You're a very successful business owner, and this journey is very time sensitive. It has a big time investment. It's a big cost investment. And I suppose a huge emotional investment into it as well. So you had to make sure that this was going to be logistically as easy as possible for you, so that you can keep your business going, keep working. Because if you're not able to do that, then ultimately a journey like this could actually be really impactful when it comes to your business and your journey of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's figuring out like what's going to almost slot in the easiest with the least amount of disruption to my business. And that was definitely a big consideration as well. And like you've said about it being time sensitive, I don't think people are aware of how much your life is revolved around this journey. So whether you're egg freezing, embryo freezing, if you're going through an IVF cycle, you are going by your Google Calendar or your watch constantly, the times of the injections, the times that you have to go into the clinic, and you have to think that will then increase to like a couple of times a day maybe that you have injections. You have to be able to do that at that time. You have to be able to have a fridge, all these logistical things that people might not consider. I remember going to a wedding with a call bag and asking the chef if I could put my injections in the freezer to quickly inject myself in between the wedding breakfast and the first dance.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is, well, beautiful that you were able to make sure that you're that organized and prepared and that you had the support. But naturally, these are the things that people need to know about beforehand. Okay, so with regard to the identification of the clinic that was the best for you, that you felt you had the most trust in, that was going to be useful from travel perspective, I'm curious just simply down to booking the consultation, and then even if you do decide to go down that route of egg freezing or whatever you choose from the catalogue of all the different services they offer, do you pay for a one-off consultation? Do you pay only upon deciding? What does that look like?
So you can even start with just a consultation. You don't have to commit to anything at all. You can pay for that one-off consultation. You can pay for your tests, and then you can at least be presented with the options, and then you know where you are sitting. And that will be for like maybe yourself and your partner as well. So if you're doing it with a partner, it might be that you want to have all the sperm and testosterone checks and all the blood work for the men's health as well as the women's. So you can do everything. And that's the route that we went. So we both went through it. We both had the tests. We both met with the doctor, and then we went through the options and what was available to us once they got those results back.
I see. With the options that you decided, you were offered a few, depending on how many cycles you wish to have. With that decision, did you understand the, I suppose, complications of what you chose, or did you go away and reflect on it a little bit? Because from what I've heard, having one cycle is not necessarily enough. So I'm assuming you could be upsold.
Yep.
So how was it presented to you, and how long did you take to decide what you wanted to do?
So when we initially went to the consultation, I had only ever had it in my mind to do it once. And I was thinking, well, why would I need more than one? I'll just pay for this once and then that'll be that. Once I've actually then stepped into this world and realised actually how many eggs you need to create a baby is a different thing. And just because you get 19, 20, however many eggs you get, it does not mean that you're guaranteed to have a baby. And this is why people have multiple cycles, because there's also no guarantee as to on the day how many eggs they would collect. It's very, very unknown. So when I had this conversation and I had the option of 1 cycle, 3 cycles, do you want to do the package deal and it's more discounted? I had decided in my mind that I only wanted to go through the process once unless something terrible happened. But I was going in with the mindset of I just need to do it once because I'm going to put everything into this process to ensure that everything within my control is going to go as smoothly as possible. And that really helped me to make these adaptations to my lifestyle as well, thinking, right, this is it, you're doing it once. Obviously, if I had got the negative results, maybe it would be a different case and I'd revisit after and then I'd just, cross that bridge then. So when we got the option there, we knew it was once. The thing that we had to go away and talk about and decide was, what did we want to do? Did we want to do egg freezing or embryo freezing? And for those people that are listening that might be like, what is the difference? The egg is just me. The egg and the embryo is with somebody else's sperm, my partner's sperm. Or for example, for some women, maybe that's a sperm donor. So then we had that conversation and we went away and we looked at the information, and all of the information as well is leading to embryos are more successful in terms of actually giving you a baby at the end of it than just eggs alone. And we decided to do a 50-50 split, providing we had enough eggs.
So a really important conversation to be had for any couples that are going through the process of egg freezing, because the couples go through the process, which some people might not realize. But if we're talking about what it is like for a man and a woman to go through this, the man also has to go through a prep as well.
Yep.
So you and Alex had decided what route you wanted to go down, the package that you wanted. Once you made that decision, how did the process look once you started?
So after we've made that decision, you have all of your blood work and everything analysed so that the doctors can figure out what you probably need. Part of them deciding the dosages of the different medications is actually looking at your follicles and your ovaries. So each woman will have a different amount of follicles on each ovary. They will then prescribe what they think is going to be the right dose for you. And I say think because these things can be adapted throughout the process and there's no guarantees. So we've then gone away, we've got the medication, we've spoken to the doctor, we've then gone back in and been taught even like how to inject, because you have to be able to do this yourself because no one's going to be there to do it for you, maybe your partner. So we've then got taught how to do this. So then we knew exactly what we needed to do. You get sent all of the medication, all the injections, everything in the post, so that then somebody comes to deliver it to you, and then you start the process and everything is mapped out on your calendar. So you know the first day of your injections, and then you know your projected egg collection date. Mine actually moved forwards because it developed faster than what they thought it would have because of the amount of follicles I had. So that's something else. It's like being adaptable, and your body will do its thing and they might need to call you in early, which is what happened. So you can have the diary, but it might change.
Is there an average or expected time of how long it will take from starting the process of injecting to then collecting the eggs?
Yeah, so it's usually between 2 and 4 weeks, depending on the woman and exactly what they need. Mine was a 2-week period. I know some people that have had it a little bit longer, but a couple weeks.
Okay, so did you do anything to prepare physically, mentally, emotionally before actually starting the process?
Yeah, so we did a lot of research into it, and this is something that I would definitely say if you're considering doing this, then do it to the best of your ability. Obviously, some things are going to be left down to fate on the day. However, there are so many things that you can control. And from a lifestyle perspective, when you're diving into nutrition, that was the biggest one. So from a nutrition perspective, I had to accept and be okay that actually my healthiest weight was a little bit larger than where I was. So I actively gained weight for this process to put my body in the best position possible. I swapped out certain products. So where, for example, you'd have your 0% yogurts and things like that, it was actually swapping to fuller fat options. It was swapping to organic milks, organic meats, things that are not as hormone injected and things like that. No alcohol. We didn't have a drop for a good 3 months before. And both myself and Alex went through all of the protocols together. And the biggest one, which is probably the hardest when you're going through this process, is actually reducing stress. It's how can you do that? So a big part of it is your well-being, it's your mental health, it's what can you do? Do you need to meditate? Do you need to journal? Do you need to actually take the stress off you a little bit and keep yourself going that way?
With regard to the changes that you made to your diet, to your stress management, I'm assuming that Alex also followed suit and you guys did that together as a joint effort to be like the picture of health.
Yeah, exactly. He did everything that I did. We very much went through the process together and he followed all the same protocols, even on one of his best friend's stag do's, which I can imagine was incredibly hard to not drink alcohol.
Oh, legend. I love that. Yeah. So you really do need to be in it together and to know that it's going to be a joint journey. For the reference of us talking about these injections, what does that genuinely look like, Fran? Like you wake up, how does your day go when you're starting this process and you know that you've got to inject these medications? How do you run your day?
Around the injections. The diary was built around the injections. The doctors set you the exact times that you need to inject. So for me, what I did was I printed off this roadmap and I put it on the fridge. So I knew exactly what time I needed to inject what medication of what dose, and I would physically tick it off because your head goes a little bit. You might forget in this scenario. So it's really important to make sure you're organised. So that would be in the morning. I remember my first injection was 7 a.m. Big tip I would say as well, if you're doing this, I would numb my belly in the morning for about 15 minutes before. So just making sure that you're getting up first. Maybe you're just allowing yourself to wake up properly. So naturally, obviously, where your cortisol is already spiking in the morning, the last thing you want to do is wake up straight away, roll out of bed, and then inject your tummy. I would get up a little bit before, make sure I'm stepping into the day in a calm way. I didn't have a coffee before it, numb my belly, then do the injection, make sure I'm hydrated and so forth. And then you'd carry on the day, and then you'd have another injection later in the day. And again, that would be timed. So everything would be revolved around that as well.
What is the purpose of the time-sensitive injections? Why is it so important that they're done at regular intervals?
You have different injections throughout the process which will help with the egg development and the egg growth. So it's important to make sure that you know when you're taking what one and what dosage. So it's all to do with making sure that, number one, you don't become like overstimulated as well. So your eggs are literally growing on the end of your follicles within your ovaries throughout the process. So the doctors will then tell you exactly what you need to do when you need to do it. And it's all to do with creating the best quality egg within their control.
Interesting. So that must be with regard to the medications, the hormones, getting the correct balance. And obviously those will be adapting or depleted or adjusted depending on how your body's naturally functioning and those dosages. So just so that I've understood correctly, not only did you have to do time-sensitive injections, but Alex did as well.
So Alex didn't do any injections.
Okay.
He was very much there to support me with mine, though. I would say that he was definitely there. There was a few times when you get to the end of the process, you feel very swollen. I looked about 6 months pregnant because my tummy had really expanded from the process. I think having that emotional support there is very, very helpful to have that relationship.
For the listeners who are probably thinking this question, and I'll just say it to put them out of their misery, how painful were the injections?
Do you know what? The injections were not that bad. I genuinely think if you go into it, if you numb your belly first, you put your ice pack on, they're really not that bad. The leg one hurts a bit more. Towards the end, I remember having to inject my legs. That was harder. And there was a time that I genuinely could not get the needle to go in. So yeah, other than that, the tummy one was absolutely fine. And also I would say if you have a little bit of belly fat, that helps. It helps to not be super, super lean so that you can actually squish your fat and then pop it in.
Did you feel any physical side effects then throughout this process? Low energy, high energy, change, fluctuation of moods? How did it impact you in the way that you felt emotionally and mentally?
As it got through to probably the last week, that's when I really felt like it impacted me. Before that, to be honest, I felt like I was kind of breezing through it. I was thinking, this is fine. Like I'm just cracking on as normal, which was great. I didn't exercise. That's just something to note as well. I did not do any strength training. I only did walking throughout the process because you can like twist your ovaries. It's called ovarian torsion. So it's advised not to do strength training and stuff. No twisting, no rotations. So in terms of keeping myself in a good space, walking I think was really important for my own mental well-being. And as being someone who's used to exercising, it really is an outlet for me. So it's thinking what are the alternative things that I could do to help me emotionally and mentally. And that was a big one, as well as journaling, as well as meditating. And then going through that part, that really helped. As it got closer, I physically was very uncomfortable. So the last couple of days before the egg collection, I was waddling. I was genuinely waddling like I was about 9 months pregnant. And there's this video of me and my mum walking into the clinic. I had a hot water bottle on my belly and I was looking around and I was literally like, am I supposed to be in this much pain? Am I supposed to feel like this right now?
If you are a busy, career-driven woman and you know that your inability to lose the body fat that you want to lose is stopping you from living a confident, successful life, then hear me out. We have just launched our Fat Loss Accelerator program, which is made specifically for women who are constrained for time, yet they want to lose anywhere between 10 to 25 pounds of body weight within 90 days. Throughout this process, we're also going to teach you exactly what you need to know so that you can maintain this result forever. That it's the lifestyle changes and the habits that you need to implement for the rest of your life to finally become that confident and successful woman who excels in all areas of her life. So if you're interested in finding out more about our Fat Loss Accelerator program, then send me a message on Instagram. Send me the words Fat Loss Accelerator. My Instagram is millie@teamcbm. The link is in the description below, and I will get back to you with all the information that you need to know. Back to the episode. That was due to the swelling of your ovaries because of how many follicles had been created or released. So that kind of end trajectory is, I'm going to assume, a given for most women, or they'll feel some element of discomfort at that point.
I think you have a real mix because I remember looking at another woman in the opposite hospital bed to me and I said to her, I said, are you in pain right now? She was sat there eating her boiled eggs. She was sat there eating her boiled eggs and I was just thinking, I was just bent over and I was thinking, I'm in so much pain. And she looks absolutely fine. And she was like, no, I'm fine. She's like, it's my second time doing it. And she genuinely looked like she was in a really good place. And the fact that it was her second time doing it, obviously I wouldn't know her exact results. It might be that, for example, her ovaries didn't swell as much as mine. Mine grew as large as 10 centimetres. And for reference, most people are between 1 and 3 centimetres with their ovaries. So mine were very enlarged. And I actually developed something called OHSS, which is like a hyperstimulation. Not all women will experience that. And I think that is quite rare to feel that level of discomfort. But it was only the last few days. With developing OHSS, you initially had the collection of the eggs, but then you were back in hospital due to the complications of OHSS. So for women who might unfortunately go through that, what were the symptoms that you had that made you think something's not quite right here? So after it, I felt super tender still. I'd had the eggs collected. I went home. I felt very, very tender. And it had been maybe 2 or 3 days. I was feeling quite sicky. I was feeling quite bloated still. And I was just really in like a lot of pain. Like I could feel the pain in my abdomen. I also started feeling shortness of breath. The shortness of breath was another thing that they'd said, like, if you have shortness of breath, you should come back to the hospital or go to an A&E, which is what we did.
Okay. How did your treatment change after that, or what protocols were you given to get you back to full health?
The main protocols, there was the few things. So it was a lot of resting. It was a lot of not pushing things too much. So I was literally like working from bed. I was not well enough to I couldn't even walk around after. In the immediate like week after, I was not walking around or anything like that. I just had to recover and also not drink too much water because I had some internal fluid and you always need to like let it dry out. That was the advice I was given. So not over drinking. And I think that was a big one. And it was very different to, again, what I was used to. Where I would normally drink 2-3 litres a day. That would be my normal habit. So I had to actively make sure I didn't do that because that was what my body needed. It had to come down with the swelling. I then went back maybe a week after and then again after that, and they actually checked the size of the ovaries to make sure they were coming down, and then you get that kind of reassurance from the doctor, yep, it's heading in the right direction, which was really helpful. But there's no medication.
So the whole time until you had that clearance, you weren't able to do any resistance training just in case of the ovarian torsion would occur?
No, and this actually extended longer than what I initially thought. When I went into the process, I thought it was a 4-week period post egg retrieval that you couldn't train, and mine actually ended up being advised over 2 months after. I still was not able to train due to it potentially causing that ovarian torsion.
And these are the type of complications that a lot of people might not know about. So with regard to that day that you went in for the egg retrieval, what does that process look like?
So on the day, you go in, you have your allocated time that you arrive, and you go into the clinic fasted. You would have just had some water that day. And then when I got there, they kit you up. So you're in your nightie and everything like that. You go into the ward. People typically have the option of if they are under local anaesthetic or general anaesthetic. I was advised general anaesthetic would be best. But I think partially because of the amount of eggs that I had developed, where it was quite a large number because they'd tested a few days before, but also because of my anxiety around it, I thought it was best for everybody, and they thought it was best for everybody if I was just put to sleep throughout the procedure.
Knock her out.
Literally, just that. And I'm really glad that I was asleep throughout the process because I think it just massively helped. I think if I was awake, the anxiousness probably wouldn't have been good for the doctor doing the egg retrieval either.
And also, just what would that process have looked like through your lens is what I want to know.
So when you're in the hospital bed and then they popped your cannula in, so you've got the cannula in, and then they wheel you down into theatre. So I'm still awake at this point, and now I'm in theatre, and there are these lights around me, and then there's a team of people that are here. You've then got the doctor that's about to perform the procedure as well, to do the collection. They then start to put the mask on you, and then they start to help to put you to sleep, and they're just counting you down. And then by the time of 10, I can't even remember, I was gone. So I was asleep throughout the procedure. The next thing I knew, I woke up in the hospital bed, back in the ward, and I was just coming around. I was quite blurry. I was just coming around, and that had all been done. And then this nurse came over to me, and she tapped me, and she was like, Fran. She was like, good news. She was like, we've collected 19 eggs. And that's the first you hear.
What did it feel like in that moment hearing that?
I was very emotional. I was very emotional because as much as I tried not to have too much expectation with how many eggs are collected, because obviously there's only so much you can do. I really did put everything into this process, and I wanted a large number because I really didn't want to go through this process twice. So I really had hoped that it would be high. When she said that, it was like this wave of relief. I just started crying and I was like, oh my goodness, all a bit blurry. Obviously, I'm just here by myself at this point. And I just remember this huge sense of relief of knowing that there was that many eggs collected.
Do you think you were ready to receive that information in that moment?
I think it would have been maybe nice if Alex was there with me. That might have been nice, but you wasn't allowed anybody else with you on the ward. He wasn't here. He was elsewhere. It would have been nice to have that, but I think knowing me and my impatient nature, I needed to know, like, what's the result? What happened? What was the outcome? And I just felt so grateful.
Did they ask you whether you'd want to be told as soon as you came round?
No.
I find that quite interesting because that to you was a positive result. Mm-hmm. To some women, it may not be a positive result. To some women, they may get different news. And so to be thinking if you're ready to receive that information, how you'd like to receive it, it's a big thing, right?
Yeah.
So I find that really interesting. And all I can say, hand on heart, is I'm so happy that you were over the moon and pleased with what you had. So after that, what were the next steps for recovery, or for even being able to see Alex and tell him what the situation was?
So I'll go into the next steps. And I think just to touch on what you've just said then about if I was a woman that did not have the news that I wanted and I was by myself, and obviously bearing in mind that this clinic isn't just for women that are choosing to delay having children. This is for women that this is their last resort to have children. I think it can be devastating. I think if you don't get that news that you want, you've put your last bit of money, your last penny into an IVF cycle, and to not have your partner there, I think it's a whole different story. And I just think I would really feel for those women. And I just want to kind of say that. And then I suppose going into the next part is Alex had to go and do his thing. So Alex has then come back, and I've then seen Alex. So I've then come out of the hospital ward and I've gone back into the waiting room area. So I've then gone to see Alex. So by this point, he's done his donation. And then we're sitting and we're waiting for the news about the next steps from the doctor. And then the doctor comes back and then she says, okay, based upon what we have from Alex, I would advise against IVF. And at that point, I was like, what do you mean? What do you mean you'd advise against it? Because from my understanding, we were going to freeze 50% eggs, 50% embryos. However, the IVF was advised to not be the best course of action for us based upon his results on the day. So even though he is fit as anything, his results were really good, he was really healthy, he's young, everything like that, it was advised that we go and have something called ICSI, which is a slightly different procedure in that the sperm is directly injected into the egg. And that is what they then advised. So we went ahead with that.
So this was, as you'd agreed, 50% would remain eggs, 50% would be created embryos. Those embryos, if ever you wish in future, will be transferred to therefore hopefully be implanted to create a baby. But the process of IVF, in vitro fertilization, which is where you obviously have the egg, sperm to create the embryo, that process you were told was not ideal based off of Alex. So then you chose, or whatever they found in Alex's donation. So then they said, but it's still going to work if we do this process called ICSI. And that's something where you then had to decide in the moment, unexpectedly, whether that was the route that you wished to go down.
Yeah. So that was a decision that we had to make there and then, because from my understanding, it had to be within like a couple hour period of his donation. My eggs were obviously there, and you need to start the process because it can take like another 5 days before they're actually put into the freezer, if you like. They become blastocysts. So you have to make that decision on the day of if you want to go down that route. And there's increased risks of it potentially not working because it can damage the egg where it's being injected. So it can potentially be something that maybe people don't always want to do. Whereas in the IVF, in the dish, that might be potentially perceived as, from my understanding, a more natural way, because then it just goes. Whereas we are picking the strongest, bestest sperm to inject it into the egg.
Okay, so IVF, you mix the egg and the sperm in a test tube. That's how you were conceived, brought to life. And the egg and the sperm do their own thing, make an embryo. Whereas ICSI, you're directly hand selecting best quality sperm, injecting it into the egg. So this was the process advised for you to go down. And I'm assuming after all of that investment, mentally, emotionally, physically, you in that moment were like, well, what other option is there?
Absolutely. You've come this far, you've put so much into it, you want it so bad by this point, and you're like, okay, yeah.
So from that point, just painting the picture here, you and Alex were both still in the hospital, made this decision, and then did you have to wait for an outcome, or were you just told, okay, we will do that?
We will do that. That is all you're told on that day. And then the next day, you get a phone call to find out how many of them survived. Because I think this is something really important to mention, that just because you have X amount of eggs collected, it doesn't mean that that's how many go into the freezer or how many eggs or embryos survive the process, because it has to obviously go through quite a few different stages to actually make it to becoming a blastocyst, to becoming in the freezer and becoming in the embryo. So before that, the following day, I remember feeling really anxious waiting for this phone call to see how many had made it. So of the 10 eggs that we'd said, okay, I want these 10 eggs to be put into the embryo mix, we then got a phone call the next day, and I believe they said that there was around about 7 that had survived to the next day. The following day after that, we got another phone call. A few more had dropped off. And then again, by day 5, we then found out that it was 3 embryos that had made it all the way through, that were ready and good enough quality to be frozen.
So 19 eggs collected, 10 eggs put towards creation of embryos using ICSI rather than IVF. And after a 5-day process, it was confirmed that you had 3 viable embryos. So it's very blatant from this to understand that the conversion rate of egg to embryo, or even using an egg in future for IVF or ICSI, there's a huge drop off between what is harvested versus what is actually viable.
Yeah, absolutely.
What emotions were you both feeling as you were told those numbers? Because there's a drop off, yet I'm sure then you've still got the bittersweet hope that obviously you've got these embryos. How did it feel with each day, that news changing?
I think it was a bit of an emotional roller coaster, to be honest. It was up, then it was down. And I did feel anxious in that week, because I was thinking, well, what if we get to day 5 and there's nothing, because you just can't predict this and there's no guarantees through the process. As much as science is incredible, there are no guarantees. And I just remember feeling really anxious that week. Alex felt the same. And I think the more that we went through that process together, the more that he then really felt those emotions as well, whereas he potentially didn't think that he maybe would, as much as me being the woman. When we found out the news that we had 3 embryos, we were so grateful. We were so incredibly grateful. And I was like, this is amazing. I can't believe that we've done this. And we have these embryos. We have 9 eggs. We have 3 embryos, and these are all gone into the freezer. And I just remember feeling like just immense gratitude for my body, for the doctors, for the process. And yeah, just really lucky.
I even feel like after we've spoken through that, I feel like I've been in it with you. Well, that's incredible. With the embryos, have you had, or will you choose to do, any genetic testing to see which embryos are most viable or preferable in the future?
From what I can understand from the process, they only get frozen if they're high enough quality. And there are grades of the quality. There's these numbers and these letters that you can get given. I believe in some countries you can even find out the sex of the embryos and things like that. I personally won't find out any more of that information. I don't think that is something that we will want to do. I think now it's just kind of letting things be what they will be. Now that we've done everything we could, we have these free embryos that we're told they're good quality, and if we need to use them in the future, then we will go ahead with it and just trust the quality of them.
That could be a whole different podcast episode in itself when it comes to the genetic testing, because you could, choose baby's eye color, what the sex is. It is crazy. But nowadays, just knowing that you've got, I suppose, that grading regarding the health, the quality is fantastic. So that's quite a journey that you've been through. What did it look like getting back to life afterwards?
Yeah, life afterwards. So obviously a couple of months post egg retrieval, no training. I wasn't training throughout the process. This was now quite a long time of no exercise. And for me, that was quite challenging because it's such a big part of my life. And obviously being a health coach myself, it's what we talk about all day. And I didn't feel myself for quite some time. And to be honest, it was all a little bit of a whirlwind because that was just before we've then moved country. Because the next thing was, of course, then moving here to Dubai. And my body is still probably not quite the same. And there's obviously certain things that I could have done, and I could have maybe lost the weight that I had gained through the process and stuff, but it just wasn't a priority. My whole priority from going through this and really appreciate my body was just health. All I wanted was to feel healthy again. I just wanted to feel strong again. I just wanted to be able to go on walks and not feel out of breath and to feel good within myself. And then I just had this whole new appreciation for just actually what my body could do for me. And it wasn't anything to do with the aesthetic side of things. And I think it's almost really good in that sense that it's made me look at something very different. And I think that's something we appreciate more as we become older. It's actually our bodies for health.
Absolutely. You know that I'm on my whole hype now with how I can optimize health, remove all the microplastics. Absolutely. And just to say, if we're talking about fertility, then that's a very important factor to consider. With that return to life as it were before, or actually embarking on your next chapter, I'm sure that it took a while for you to come back to yourself as well, perhaps due to just such significant hormonal fluctuations, because we didn't touch on the fact that you were asked to go on hormonal contraception or to take exogenous hormones. Previously, you were not taking any hormones, you weren't on the pill. And that's actually something advisable before going through this process. So they want to understand what your natural cycle looks like. I believe if you're on something like the depot injection, 12 months or so might be required for that to come out of your system before you get your natural cycle. For the pill or hormonal coil could take up to 6 months to go back to your natural cycle. But you were fortunate in the position where you didn't have to come off any contraception and wait to be able to be viable or able to go through the process of egg freezing. But actually through that process, you were then given exogenous hormones through the means of the pill.
Yeah, that's right.
Why did they ask you to go on the pill?
So more so than anything, it was due to scheduling so that they can book you in and know exactly when your bleeds are going to be, so that they can time the injections, so that they can also time the egg collection, because everything is just so precise with when you need to do what. And it's like when you stop bleeding, when you finish your period, when you need to start that first injection, and all these details here. So that's really crucial that they can know that. I do know of some clinics that do go through more of a natural path, and they actually just go with your genuine natural cycle, and they don't necessarily get you to take a pill to book you in for a certain day. I think that is dependent upon the clinic as well, and like their processes.
Did you have any side effects or noticeable symptoms after going onto the pill then coming off of it?
I would say that the side effects that I experienced, I wouldn't attribute them necessarily to the pill. It might just be the amount of hormones that I've been injected with. And obviously, as you've said, like, I'm somebody who doesn't normally take anything. I'm very natural. I don't have a pill or anything that I do usually take. It took a good couple of months to my cycle to regain its normal flow again, and to go back to where it usually was. And that's a big part of it as well, but which might have just been down to the injections or the pill. Who knows?
Understood. So now that your health has regulated, you've got settled into a new place, and hopefully going through that process of not only obviously egg collection, but then finding your feet in a new country, I'm sure that you've had time to reflect on how you feel now after thinking about this for a long time, making the decision, and knowing that in the freezer you've got eggs and embryos, should you whenever decide that you wish to use those to conceive a baby. How does it feel compared to when obviously you were first investigating and having these thoughts in the back of your mind, that quote unquote biological clock ticking?
I feel so empowered to have made that decision. I feel like I have taken control within my control of what I can do. And I feel really relieved that I did go through the process. And even though I did have a few health complications along the way, I'm so grateful that I was in a position that I could do this. And I feel like for me, it's almost as if a weight has been slightly lifted. And even though it doesn't mean that we are definitely going to be able to have a baby from what we have in the freezer, it's a hell of a lot more likely than us not doing it at all, especially as I go into mid-30s. It's for me just that investment in my health and in my family in the future. That's how I see it.
It must feel so, empowering, that word that you used there, to know you can enjoy life, be present, have your experiences however long you wish until eventually there is ultimately still that biological clock for women, even if you've had your eggs harvested or embryos created, which we cannot ignore. That's really important for us to talk about. So has that been something that because you've said, yes, it feels empowering to know that you've got that option, but it doesn't actually make the biological clock void, because we've still got a timeline at which we're able to be pregnant, and that is pre-menopause.
Yep. Absolutely. And I think that is something that obviously we are not going to be able to control. And women go through perimenopause. It could be as early as 35. You just, nobody knows. And obviously something that we'd looked into before as well, it's how do we find that out? And potentially looking into, there's no guarantee on this, but potentially looking into when your mother, your nan went through menopause, and looking at the data from the ovarian reserve, from the blood test, it's an indicator.
Yeah.
But it's still not a guarantee.
So you can only have that slight indicator and pattern recognition from generations before you as to when you'll go through menopause. And if you're someone who has early menopause that runs in the family, then genuinely you'll hear that clock ticking louder. And perhaps you should be thinking that things are more time sensitive. So it's nice that it's empowering, but it doesn't detract from the fact that ultimately we still need to respect biology.
Yep.
There's no arguing that.
Yep.
And with that reference to biology, it's important to not exclude any women in this conversation that might have certain female health conditions, because this is something that you and I looked into, and you actually were asked about when it came to PCOS, for example. They were curious whether you did have PCOS.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that women that have PCOS, their results might be different, their medications might be different, same thing with endometriosis. And this is all like data that they try and gather to give you the best options possible. And obviously, if women were to go through multiple cycles of this, the doctors would have more evidence as to how their bodies react to a different dosage and a different medication. So that is obviously the pros of people doing it multiple times, as opposed to just once. And it's just more data for them. And I think it's the point as well of, it's interesting because obviously we've spoken about how you can't change when women go through perimenopause and menopause, but my boyfriend's mother actually didn't have him until 42. So after years of struggling, and they didn't think that they were going to conceive, they did, and they had him. So it just goes to show that every single woman is so individual and so unique, and it does happen in later years as well.
Yeah, it's the universe will do its thing. And as much as we can try and control certain elements, there's certain things that we can't control, but we can put ourselves in the best, most calculated position. So with regard to the future now, what you feel like that's going to look like for women who are career driven, who, as you say, know that 30 is the new 40 40 is the new 30 because they want to prioritize their career, they want to become financially abundant, intelligent, spend all their time pouring into themselves to hopefully put them in a position to better facilitate a family and motherhood in the future. Do you feel like there is about to be a shift in how we're treating female health, how we're treating entrepreneurship, and also just acceptance of females being more so in control of when they time motherhood?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's already happening. I can see it already happening with so many women, and how we are now living is different to how we lived in previous history. It's completely a different situation, and women are building businesses. Women are doing things so much later. And I think the more options that are available and the more that we can do from a health perspective and a science perspective, it just gives people that empowerment, that choice, and to know that it doesn't have to be the way that you're maybe taught growing up, and things have to be black and white, and you have to do things by certain ages, and all the societal pressures that we used to potentially feel, probably still do feel. I don't think that's gone, and I think that will still remain, and people have their own views, but I think it's an incredible thing that we can now do.
I 100% agree. Reflecting on this conversation and how my feelings towards egg freezing, having children, prioritizing career have shifted since I've seen you go through this, I only feel more at peace knowing that is an option should I wish to delay or have no other choice to delay motherhood to a later date than what is traditionally expected, and to be confident in knowing that that's the right thing for me in this moment. And I'm sure that so many women listening feel the same, but that's because I actually have the knowledge of how accessible this is, because we've spoken about the costs and what that looks like. And there's probably going to be a lot of women that haven't even thought about this or know about it. They never chosen to look into it because they're thinking, I wouldn't be able to afford that. So just to put it transparently, what did this process cost you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the investment side is probably something that puts maybe women off of even looking into it. And what I would say is there's always finance, there's always options for plans. And I think it comes down to as well, like obviously your situation, but also priorities. Like, for example, I've never been somebody who spent money on cars or fancy bags or anything like that. My investments are my health, their coaching, their mentoring. It's literally the family, the life that I'm trying to build. That's where I would choose to spend my money. But with that being said, I think it's important to go through how much things roughly cost. So every woman will be slightly different. And what I would say is if you initially get a quote, expect that it might be another couple grand on top of that, because you don't know what unforeseen situations and circumstances might happen along the way. For example, our ICSI. that isn't something that we were prepared for. We thought we were having something different until it got to the day. So the initial consult, say you're spending around about £500 for that. And then when you go through the actual process, it will depend on your meds, but you're probably looking at anywhere between £5,000 and £7,000 if you are solely doing egg freezing. It might be less. If you choose to do egg and embryo, there will be that extra financial implication because you're having two processes done, which are done separately, which will be a little bit more. And then if you're having ICSI, that might also be another couple of grand on top of that. So in all, ours came to around about £10,000 for the total costs of start to finish.
Yeah. And as you said, that there's loads of different options that are now available, whether it's payment plans or after we've had this conversation, I'm going to put a little savings pot together for egg freezing just in case. And if I don't need it, then I'll use it on a nice vacation or something. Like, what's the harm in doing something along the lines of that?
Yeah.
But also really important to note is there's a different end to this, right? So there's the now and there's the future, which is embryo transfer. When that process comes along, did you or have you looked into the costs of that?
So that is a whole separate thing within itself. And I haven't gone into the depths of how much that costs, in all honesty, because I think for me, I've almost had that as a bit in the side of my mind. So that this for me is almost like a backup plan if we need to use it. Not saying that we will definitely even go down this route. So I'm not sure on the exact cost, but I believe maybe around about £5,000.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Currently.
It's interesting because I always thought about that when it came to, this is very similar conversation to a podcast that I recorded previously with Siobhan, but we did that about cosmetic surgery and in the moment saving up for it, then doing that surgery, but also in the future you're tied in. There will eventually need to be a revision or perhaps not guaranteed revision, but a new type of surgery because it's not going to last your lifetime. So it's almost like future-proofing yourself as much as you can do. But just by having this information, having this knowledge, you have power as a woman to lead your life in the way that you wish to, and you can still prioritize your goals, your passion, your career, and a family.
Yeah. And I think for me, like that's the most important thing above anything else. A family. I think that comes on top of anything. And that's why I wanted to be able to have this choice.
Fran, honestly, thank you so much for sharing, because this conversation is going to open the eyes of not only so many women, but so many men who are listening in case their partners ever go through this or what that process might look like. And just more knowledge is more power. So really, really appreciate you. Where can anyone find you, connect with you to understand a little bit more about you and your journey?
Yeah, so head over to Instagram and go onto Little Lady Lifts, and then you can pop me a message. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions if you're considering it. If you just want to ask a few things, then my DMs are open. There's also a highlight that's all about my egg freezing journey, so you can actually go back and watch the videos and actually in the mix with me coming into the hospital and so forth.
Oh, that's incredible. Thank you so much, Fran. Appreciate you a whole lot.
Thank you.